have a very, very tender spot for this movie. It's very hard to look like you're having a fun time when you're like,
There are movies that entertain you for a couple of hours, and then there are movies that burrow so deep into your soul that decades later, you still know every single line, every beat, every breathless moment. Dirty Dancing, released in 1987, is undeniably the latter. 37 years after it first hit theaters, people are still watching it, still crying at the same scenes, and still jumping to their feet when that final dance sequence begins. But here is the thing about Dirty Dancing that most people do not realize: what you see on screen is only half the story. The real story, the jaw-dropping, almost unbelievable story, happened behind the cameras, between takes, in freezing cold lakes, and in editing rooms where accidental footage was discovered and recognized as pure gold. Today, we are going to pull back the curtain on some of the most unnoticed scenes and secrets from this legendary film, and trust us when we say, you are not going to believe some of what happened. Let us start at the very beginning, because even before a single frame was shot, this movie was almost dead on arrival. The script, written by Eleanor Bergstein and inspired by her own real-life experiences growing up and dancing at Catskill Mountain resorts, was rejected an extraordinary 43 times before a small video distribution company called Vestron Pictures finally agreed to take a chance on it. 43 rejections. Think about that for a moment. One of the most beloved films in the history of cinema was turned down dozens of times by studios who simply could not see its potential. When Vestron finally agreed to produce it, they did so with a shoestring budget of just $6 million, fully expecting the film to quietly disappear after a brief theatrical run before being shuffled off to the home video market, which was actually Vestron's primary business anyway. Nobody, and we mean absolutely nobody, saw what was coming. Now, before we even get to the scenes themselves, we have to talk about the title, because the name Dirty Dancing almost never happened. In the late 1980s, anything that sounded remotely provocative raised eyebrows at every level of the entertainment industry. The title was scandalous enough that customs officials at the Canadian border actually held up the film's daily footage because they genuinely believed they were dealing with an adult film. Eleanor Bergstein later recalled this in interviews, describing the confusion and frustration of having their footage delayed because of a misunderstanding rooted entirely in the title. Despite the complications, the studio held firm on the name. Patrick Swayze, however, was not pleased. In a 1987 interview with entertainment reporter Bobby Wygant, Patrick openly admitted that he hated the title and had actively lobbied to have it changed. He found it embarrassing and felt it misrepresented the film's deeper emotional story. What makes this even more entertaining is the context. The alternative title being floated around was "I Was a Teenage Mambo Queen." So, as much as Patrick disliked Dirty Dancing, it is fairly safe to say the alternative was considerably worse. The studio made the right call, even if the leading man disagreed. Now let us get into the casting, because the version of Dirty Dancing we all know and love came remarkably close to being an entirely different film. The role of Johnny Castle, the brooding, magnetic dance instructor who becomes the heart of the story, was not immediately handed to Patrick Swayze. Several actors were considered for the part, including Billy Zane, Val Kilmer, and Benicio del Toro, each of whom would have taken the character in a completely different direction. Billy Zane was at one point so close to landing the role that filming had already begun with him attached to the project. It was only after producers observed that he shared zero romantic chemistry with Jennifer Grey that the decision was made to let him go. The director, Emile Ardolino, was also deeply committed to casting someone who could genuinely dance rather than relying on stand-ins or camera tricks, and Patrick's background training at both the Harkness and Joffrey ballet schools made him an exceptionally strong candidate despite the complications surrounding his health at the time. On Jennifer Grey's side of the casting table, the competition was equally fierce. Actresses including Sarah Jessica Parker and Winona Ryder both auditioned for the role of Baby before Jennifer was ultimately selected. Jennifer was paid $50,000 for her performance, a sum that feels almost comically modest given the cultural phenomenon the film became. But perhaps the most fascinating detail about her casting is this: Jennifer Grey was not a trained dancer. Unlike her co-star, who had devoted his life to dance and physical performance, Jennifer came into the production with far less formal training, and she was absolutely terrified. She later described how Patrick's fearlessness clashed electrifyingly with her own anxiety, creating a dynamic between the two of them that felt almost like a collision of opposites, and that collision, captured on film, is a large part of why their on-screen relationship feels so intensely real. Speaking of real, let us talk about one of the most iconic and least understood scenes in the entire movie. During the musical rehearsal montage, there is a moment where Johnny trails his fingers lightly down Baby's arm while they are practicing the mambo, and Baby dissolves into uncontrollable laughter while Johnny's expression darkens with visible frustration. Audiences have always loved this scene for how natural and playful it feels. The reason it feels so natural is because it was completely unplanned. It was not in the script. It was not choreographed. It was not even something the director knew was being captured at the time. Jennifer Grey was genuinely ticklish. When Patrick's fingers moved down her arm during rehearsal, her laughter was completely involuntary and entirely authentic. And Patrick's irritation? That was real too. He was genuinely frustrated by the interruption to their rehearsal flow. The cameras happened to be rolling, but according to producer Linda Gottlieb, nobody thought much of the footage at the time because they eventually completed the scene without the laughter and moved on. It was not until the editing room, deep in post-production, that the film's dance editor stumbled across the footage and showed it to the team. When Linda Gottlieb and the rest of the crew watched it back, they burst out laughing themselves. They then showed it to Jennifer and Patrick, who reportedly laughed just as hard, partly because the moment was genuinely funny, and partly because they had both completely forgotten it had ever happened. The decision was made on the spot to use the unscripted version instead, and that accidental, forgotten, absolutely real moment became one of the most beloved scenes in the film's history. The spontaneity does not stop there. Another scene that audiences have always connected with deeply is the moment where Johnny and Baby dance together to Mickey and Sylvia's classic track Love is Strange in what feels like a completely private, unguarded moment between two people falling for each other. What most viewers have never known is that the cameras were rolling without the actors' knowledge during what was supposed to be a simple rehearsal. Patrick and Jennifer were running through their movements, relaxed and unaware they were being filmed, and what the cameras captured was an interaction so genuine and unforced that the director chose to keep it exactly as it was. There was no second take. There was no direction given. What you see in the finished film is two people simply being themselves in a moment they thought was private, and that authenticity is precisely why it resonates so powerfully. Now let us address the filming conditions, because they were genuinely brutal in ways that the finished film gives absolutely no indication of. Production on Dirty Dancing began on September 5, 1986, and wrapped up 43 days later on October 27, 1986. On paper, that sounds straightforward enough. In reality, the experience was physically punishing for nearly everyone involved. During interior scenes shot inside the resort, the combination of summer temperatures outside and the heat generated by camera and lighting equipment pushed indoor temperatures to nearly 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Choreographer Kenny Ortega later recalled that on one particularly grueling day, 10 people fainted within a 25-minute window. Veteran actress Paula Truman, who played the memorable character Mrs. Schumacher, collapsed on set and had to be transported to the local emergency room for treatment of severe dehydration. This was not an easy production, and the physical toll on the cast and crew was immense. But nothing quite captures the extremity of the filming conditions like the infamous lake scenes, specifically the rehearsal sequence where Johnny lifts Baby in the water, the pivotal moment that the entire film builds toward emotionally. By the time production shifted to these exterior scenes, summer had long since surrendered to autumn. The lake temperature had dropped to approximately 40 degrees Fahrenheit. In Jennifer Grey's own words from subsequent interviews, the water was horrifically cold. She described enduring it purely on the basis of being young, hungry, and deeply committed to getting the film right. Patrick, writing years later in his autobiography, described the lake as hypothermically cold, recalling how they filmed the sequence multiple times despite the brutal conditions. For Patrick, however, the lake was not even his biggest physical challenge. What almost nobody knew during production, and what audiences watching the finished film would never suspect, was that Patrick was performing every single one of those physically demanding dance sequences on a knee that was essentially destroyed. Most of the cartilage was gone, leaving bone grinding directly against bone with every step, every jump, every lift. He described the sensation during the water lifts as agonizing, noting that even a small person feels like 500 pounds when lifted in water, and his compromised knee absorbed every bit of that weight. The origins of this injury were rooted in his teenage years, when a serious football accident caused significant damage to his left leg. In an effort to rehabilitate and strengthen his joints, the young Patrick Swayze had turned to dance and gymnastics, which ultimately redirected his entire life's path. He went on to become a principal dancer with the Elliott Ballet Company, an extraordinary achievement, but at 24 years old a severe tooth infection led to a staph infection that entered his bloodstream and settled in his already damaged leg. Doctors warned him that without immediate and aggressive treatment, amputation was a serious possibility. He survived, but the injury never fully healed. By the time he was on the set of Dirty Dancing, performing 8-hour days of physically demanding choreography on a grueling 43-day schedule, he was doing so in genuine, significant pain. The fact that none of this is visible in a single frame of the finished film is a testament to a level of professionalism and commitment that is genuinely extraordinary. Behind all of the pain and all of the unscripted magic, there was also real tension between the two leads that shaped every moment of their on-screen relationship. Patrick and Jennifer had actually worked together before, on the 1984 film Red Dawn, and their dynamic had been complicated from the start. Their acting styles were fundamentally different, and those differences created friction throughout the production. Patrick was fearless and instinctive. Jennifer was emotionally raw and prone to both tears and laughter at moments that disrupted the shooting flow. Patrick documented some of these clashes in his autobiography, describing days where Jennifer's emotional responses made filming difficult. And yet, director Emile Ardolino understood that the friction between them was not a problem to be solved, it was an asset to be harnessed. At one point during production, he reportedly had both actors sit down and rewatch their original chemistry test together, reminding them of how powerfully they connected when they let go of the tension. It worked. Whatever was happening between them off camera, when they stepped in front of the lens, something undeniable took over.